Welcome to Uncut, Gems and Their Stories. I'm Paige. How are you? Whether you're here to unwind, learn something new, or just escape reality for a little while, you're in the right place. Because this is the podcast where we dig into the raw, unpolished stories hidden inside the world's most incredible gemstones. So grab a drink, light one up, get comfortable, and let's uncover another story. Welcome to Uncut. Welcome back to Uncut with Paige. I'm Paige. Whether you're here because you love gemstones, love history, or you're just looking for an excuse to let someone else do the talking for 20 minutes while your brain takes a little vacation, I'm really glad you're here. So grab a drink, and ironically, maybe not wine for today's episode. And hey, let's get into it. Because today we're talking about one of the most recognizable gemstones on Earth. A gemstone that was once considered just as valuable as diamonds. A gemstone that kings wore, bishops still wear, and ancient Greeks genuinely believed could keep them from getting drunk. Yeah, imagine believing your jewelry could outsmart alcohol. Honestly, if TikTok existed 2,000 years ago, there would absolutely be influencers saying, "Scientists don't want you to know this one purple crystal trick." But despite how ridiculous that sounds today, there's actually a fascinating reason people believed it. And that story begins with a god having an absolutely terrible day. So, let's get into amethyst. The word amethyst comes from the ancient Greek word amethyston, literally translated not drunken. Right away, that's a strange name for a gemstone. We name stones after colors, places, or people, but this one, it's named after sobriety. To understand why, we have to step into Greek mythology. Now, fair warning, Greek myths are basically a collection of gods making terrible decisions and everyone else suffering the consequences. And today's story is no exception. The myth centers around Dionysus, or Bacchus if you're reading Roman mythology. He's the god of wine, celebration, madness, and basically every decision you regret the next morning. One version of the story says Dionysus became furious after being insulted by a mortal. In his anger, he swore revenge. The next human he crossed paths with would be torn apart by a sacred tiger. No questions asked. Unfortunately, the next person happened to be a young woman named Amethyst. She wasn't part of the argument. She wasn't guilty of anything. She was simply walking to the temple of Amethyst, called Diana by the Romans, to worship. As the tigers charged, Amethystos prayed for protection. The goddess answered immediately. Instead of letting her be attacked, Amethyst transformed the young woman into a statue of pure white quartz. When Dionysus arrived and saw what his rage had caused, his anger disappeared. He was overcome with guilt. In remorse, he poured wine over the white crystal as an offering. The wine soaked into the stone, staining it the rich violet color we know today. And that's how the Greeks explained the birth of amethyst. Now, obviously, that's not a geological explanation. Spoiler alert, volcanoes don't usually involve wine gods. But mythology wasn't meant to explain chemistry. It explained value. To the Greeks, this story wasn't just about where a gemstone came from. It became a lesson about restraint, about what happens when emotions control you, and why wisdom is often found after regret. That symbolism stuck for thousands of years. Now here's where things get even stranger. The Greeks didn't simply tell this story. They believed the gemstone inherited its power. If wine created the purple color, then somehow the stone must have power over wine. Makes perfect sense. Well, if you're living 2,500 years ago. So wealthy Greeks began wearing amethyst jewelry during banquets. They carved entire drinking goblets from amethyst. Some even dropped small pieces of the crystal into their wine cups. Not because it tasted better, but because they genuinely believed it would prevent intoxication. Imagine going out with your friends and saying, "Don't worry guys, I brought my sobriety rock," and that's essentially what was happening. Of course, it didn't actually stop anyone from getting drunk, but it may have done something just as interesting. Psychologists today know that belief itself can influence behavior. If someone truly believed they were protected from excess, they might naturally drink slower, feel more in control, or simply remind themselves to practice moderation. Whether the crystal had magical powers or not, it became a symbol, a physical reminder to stay balanced. And honestly, that's a much more realistic kind of magic. As time passed, people started assigning even more powers to Amethyst. Not just protection from drunkenness, but protection from excess in general. Excessive anger, excessive fear, negative thoughts, temptation. People believed it sharpened the mind, improved the memory, made you wiser, and even inspired creativity. Some legends claimed it protected against witchcraft and black magic. Others believed soldiers who carried amethyst into battle would think more clearly under pressure. It was considered a gemstone of courage, focus, and emotional balance. And honestly, if you look at those beliefs together, there is a pattern. People weren't asking the stone to make them stronger. They wanted it to help them stay in control of themselves. It's a surprisingly modern idea. Because even today, when people buy amethyst for spiritual reasons, they usually aren't hoping it'll shoot lasers or predict the future. They're looking for calm, stress relief, better sleep, a quieter mind. Thousands of years later, the symbolism hasn't really changed. Only the language has. What's really fascinating is that amethyst didn't stay trapped inside Greek mythology. Most ancient beliefs disappear with the civilization that created them. But amethyst didn't. Instead, it kept collecting new meaning wherever it traveled. The Romans embraced it, the Egyptians treasured it, medieval Europe transformed it into one of Christianity's most recognizable gemstones. And somehow, this little piece of purple quartz managed to survive every empire that claimed it. Next, we're going to travel from ancient Greece to Egypt, where pharaohs turned amethyst into protected amulet, and then into medieval Europe, where bishops began wearing the gemstone for a reason that might surprise you. Turns out they weren't worried about getting drunk on wine anymore, they were worried about getting drunk on power. So the Greeks believed amethyst could keep you from getting drunk, but once their empire faded, the story didn't disappear. Instead, the gemstone kept finding new audiences. And each civilization looked at this same purple crystal and somehow saw something different. Long before crystals were sold in cute little velvet bags at metaphysical shops, ancient Egyptians were already wearing amethyst. To them, it wasn't just beautiful, it was protective. Pharaohs, nobles, and wealthy Egyptians carved amethyst into rings, scarabs, beads, and elaborate amulets. They believed it could guard the wearer against harm, negative energy, and evil influences. One of my favorite examples comes from the Book of the Dead. Despite the name, it wasn't a horror story. It was essentially a guidebook for the afterlife, a collection of spells and instructions meant to help someone safely navigate the next world. Among its recommendations, it encouraged Egyptians to carve amethyst into heart-shaped amulets and bury them with the deceased. Now, why the heart? Because the Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, was where intelligence, memory, emotion, and morality lived. When someone died, their heart would eventually become weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If your heart was heavier than the feather, well, things didn't go particularly well after that. So placing a protective amethyst over the heart wasn't simply decoration. It was thought to help safeguard the soul itself. And honestly, that's a lot of responsibility for one little crystal. Now let's talk about probably the most famous queen in history, Cleopatra. Whether every story about her is completely true is difficult to know. Ancient historians had a habit of making people even more dramatic than they already were. But we know Cleopatra is our original crystal girl. Several historical traditions claim Cleopatra owned an amethyst signet ring engraved with a divine figure from Persian mythology. And one reason she supposedly treasured it? Its famous reputation for keeping the mind clear. Think about it. The same gemstone that Greek nobles used during drinking parties, one of history's most powerful queens was said to carry as a symbol of wisdom and restraint. Different culture, same underlying idea, mental clarity. It's amazing how often that theme keeps resurfacing. And of course, not every ancient belief makes perfect sense. For example, Egyptians believed amethyst could protect against sorcery. Fair enough. But they also believed it could help treat gout, which seems very specific. One traditional remedy involved tying an amethyst around your neck using a strand of peacock hair, along with a swallow feather. Apparently, that combination was supposed to help. Would your doctor recommend it today? Probably not. Actually, definitely not. But these stories remind us of something really important. Ancient people weren't stupid. They were trying to explain illness, luck, fear, and the unknown using the knowledge available to them. Gemstones become physical symbols of hope. Sometimes that's almost as powerful as medicine itself. As Rome expanded, they adopted many Greek beliefs, including the reputation of amethyst. The Romans still associated it with moderation, but they added another layer: protection in battle. Roman soldiers often carried gemstones as personal talismans, and amethyst became one of the favorites because it represented courage, clear thinking, and emotional control under pressure. But here's the interesting part. The Romans didn't believe gemstones worked alone. They believed metals had their own energy too. Copper, for example, was sacred to Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. It was thought to possess protective and healing qualities. So if you combined copper with amethyst, you weren't just wearing jewelry, you were combining two sources of protective power into one object. Imagine being a Roman soldier. You're heading into battle. You can't predict what's going to happen next. You don't know if you'll make it home. Would carrying something that reminds you to stay calm, stay focused, and stay brave actually help? Yeah, I personally think it might. And even today, athletes have lucky socks. People wear wedding rings. Some refuse to fly without a specific necklace. Humans have always attached meaning to objects. Amethyst just happened to become one of history's most popular lucky charms. Then, something unexpected happened. Christianity spread throughout Europe. Many pagan traditions disappeared, but amethyst survived. Instead of being abandoned, it was adopted. During the Middle Ages, amethyst became known as the bishop's stone. High-ranking clergy wore large amethyst rings as symbols of humanity, humility, purity, and spiritual discipline. And remember how the Greeks believed amethyst prevented drunkenness? That symbolism evolved. Now, the concern wasn't becoming drunk on wine, it was becoming drunk on power. Bishops believed the stone reminded them to stay humble, to resist temptation, to remain focused on serving others rather than seeking wealth or status. And I love that symbolism because it transforms the idea from something physical into something psychological. The stone wasn't magically controlling anyone. It was acting as a constant reminder of the person they wanted to become. What's even more incredible, this tradition never completely disappeared. Even today, bishops in several Christian denominations still wear amethyst rings during official ceremonies. Okay, stop for a second, pull yourself out of history, bring yourself into right now, and think about that. A tradition inspired by beliefs over 2,000 years ago is still alive and practiced today. How many objects can say that? By this point, amethyst has traveled across continents. It has been carried by Greek philosophers, Roman soldiers, Egyptian royalty, Christian bishops, and countless ordinary people looking for protection, courage, or peace. But it still wasn't finished. Because while Europe was assigning amethyst religious meaning, cultures across Asia were discovering entirely different spiritual connections. Tibetan monks, Hindu philosophy, and even Feng Shui would all embrace the same gemstone. Not because of ancient Greek myth, but because they believed purple quartz had a remarkable ability to quiet the mind. Here's that theme again. And surprisingly, that's where some of amethyst's most recognizable modern symbolism comes from. So by now, amethyst has traveled through mythology, tombs, battlefields, hands of bishops, and you think that's where its spiritual story ends, but we're just getting started. Because while Europe saw amethyst as a symbol of humility, cultures through Asia began viewing it as something entirely different. Not a stone of protection from outside forces, but a tool for understanding what was happening inside your own mind. If you've ever seen someone using purple prayer beads, there's a good chance you've already seen amethyst in one of its most sacred roles. For centuries, Tibetan monks have treasured amethyst as a meditation stone. It is commonly carved into mala beads, strings of prayer beads used while reciting mantras or focusing during meditation. Unlike the Greeks, who believed the stone protected against drunkenness, Buddhist traditions emphasize something much quieter: a calm mind, greater awareness, deeper concentration. The idea isn't that the gemstone magically gives you enlightenment, it's that the stone becomes a reminder. Every bead you touch, every breath you take, every mantra you repeat brings your attention back to the present moments. I think that's one of the reasons gemstones have remained meaningful for thousands of years. Even if you don't believe crystals have supernatural powers, holding something physical can anchor your attention. That's psychological. Whether it's prayer beads, a wedding ring, or your favorite hoodie, humans naturally attach meaning to objects, and we feel safe within them. Sometimes, those objects remind us who we want to be. In Hindu tradition, amethyst is associated with the crown chakra. Now, if you've ever heard of chakras before, here's the super simplified version. They're traditionally described as energy centers within the body. Each one represents different aspects of physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. The crown chakra sits at the very top of the head. It's connected with wisdom, consciousness, inner peace, and spiritual awareness. Because of its violet color, amethyst became closely linked with this chakra. It's believed to help quiet racing thought, encourage clarity, and strengthen a person's connection to something greater than themselves. Whether someone interprets that spiritually, psychologically, or symbolically, the message is remarkably familiar. Clear your mind, slow down, pay attention. Again, it's fascinating how similar these beliefs are to the ones held by Greeks over 2,000 years earlier. Different religions, different continents, completely different cultures, yet somehow everyone keeps arriving at the same conclusion with a twist. Purple equals peace. Meanwhile, over in China, amethyst found another purpose. In feng shui, the gemstone is used to balance energy within a space. If you've ever heard someone talk about creating good energy in a room, that's the basic idea. In feng shui, the placement of objects is believed to influence harmony and balance. Amethyst geodes, the clusters and carved sculptures, are often placed in homes or businesses to encourage calmness, protect against negative energy, and promote healthy relationships. And even if you don't practice feng shui, have you ever walked into a room that just felt peaceful? Or the opposite, a room that instantly made you uncomfortable? Maybe it's the lighting, maybe it's the colors, maybe it's the people, whatever it is, our surroundings absolutely affect how we feel. So it's easy to understand why cultures around the world begin associating beautiful natural objects with positive environments. At this point in history, amethyst had accumulated an almost unbelievable list of abilities. Depending on who you asked, it could keep you sober, protect you in battle, ward off evil, prevent temptation, improve your focus, encourage creativity, calm anxiety, strengthen your intuition, fight gout, protect your home, help with meditation, connect you to divine. That's quite the resume. And while modern science doesn't support supernatural claims about gemstones, I think there's something really interesting hiding underneath all of these stories. Every single culture looked at the same crystal, and instead of seeing power, they saw balance. No aggression, no wealth, no domination, but balance. And that is actually a very unique reputation, especially when you compare it to gemstones like rubies, which symbolize passion, or diamonds, which become symbols of power and status. Amethyst has almost always represented something quieter. Wisdom, humility, self-control, and maybe that's why it's remained so universally loved. Now, as incredible as these legends are, there's one story that's even more unbelievable. Because unlike Greek mythology, this one is actually true. Imagine standing on Earth over 100 million years ago. Massive volcanic eruptions are reshaping entire continents. Rivers of lava stretch farther than the eye can see. Gas bubbles become trapped inside cooling rocks, forming enormous hollow chambers. At the time, they're completely empty. There's pockets of air inside solid basalt. But over millions of years, hot, mineral-rich groundwater begins slowly flowing through these cavities. And when I say slowly, I mean geologically slowly. Thousands, then millions of years pass. tiny crystals begin forming on the wall. Layer by layer, atom by atom, no rush, no shortcut, just extraordinary patience. Eventually, those once empty bubbles become lined with sparkling quartz crystals. Some of them grow into enormous cathedral-like geodes, taller than a person. But at first, they aren't purple. They're completely clear. So the obvious question is, what turns ordinary quartz into one of the most recognizable gemstones on Earth? The answer turns out to be surprisingly complicated and mind-blowing, because it involves iron, natural radiation, and millions of years of perfect timing. And once you understand how amethyst actually forms, I promise you'll never look at a geode the same way again. First things first, amethyst isn't its own mineral. It's actually a variety of quartz, one of the most common minerals on Earth. Quartz is simply made of silicon and oxygen, chemically written as SiO2, which honestly makes amethyst even cooler, because the only thing separating ordinary clear quartz from gorgeous purple amethyst is a handful of tiny imperfections. Nature proving once again that imperfections can create something extraordinary. Let's rewind the clock again, 100 to 130 million years. These huge volcanic eruptions are pouring lava across what is now South America. Now, here's the fascinating part. If quartz grows naturally inside these geodes, why isn't every quartz crystal purple? Well, the answer is iron. Tiny traces of iron become trapped inside the quartz while it's growing. And when I say tiny, I mean tiny. We're talking just a few parts per million. Without that iron, the crystal stays completely clear. No purple, no amethyst, just ordinary quartz. But even iron isn't enough. The crystal still needs one final ingredient, which is natural radiation. Now, before anyone panics, this is not the scary movie version of radiation. It's simply low levels of natural radiation that exist within Earth's crust. Over millions of years, that radiation changes the electronic structure of the iron atoms locked inside the crystal. Those tiny changes affect the way the crystal absorbs light. Instead of reflecting every color equally, it absorbs certain wavelengths, allowing those rich violet and purple tones to shine back at us. So, to make amethyst, you need a special recipe. Volcanoes, silica-rich water, tiny amounts of iron, natural radiation, and millions of years, and just the right temperature and pressure. Miss even one ingredient and you don't get amethyst. Honestly, it's amazing we have as much of it as we do. Some of the world's most spectacular amethyst comes from Brazil and Uruguay. And if you've ever seen those enormous geodes that people stand inside, there's a good chance they came from one of those two countries. Brazil is famous for producing gigantic cathedral geodes. Some weigh several tons. Others are taller than a person. They're almost impossible to appreciate in photographs because your brain assumes they're much smaller than they actually are. Then there's Uruguay. Uruguayan amethyst tends to be smaller, but it's often prized for its incredibly deep, rich purple color. It's the kind of purple that almost looks like velvet. Meanwhile, Zambia has become one of the world's most important modern sources of high-quality amethyst. Zambian stones are often known for their exceptional color saturation and flashes of blue and red within the purple, making them especially desirable in fine jewelry. It's fascinating that although these deposits are separated by entire oceans, they all share remarkably similar geological histories. Ancient volcanic activity, iron-rich rocks, and millions of years of patience. Now here's something that many people don't realize. Scientists can actually grow amethyst in laboratories without waiting millions of years. Synthetic amethyst has the exact same chemical composition as natural amethyst. Still quartz, still purple, and to the naked eye, it can look almost identical. So how do gemologists tell the difference? Well, they look for nature's fingerprints. Tiny inclusion, subtle color zoning, natural growth patterns that formed over millions of years beneath the earth. Lab-grown stones often appear almost too perfect. And that's one of the things I love about gemology. Perfection isn't always the goal. Sometimes the tiny flaws tell the most interesting story. Today, amethyst is the birthstone for February. It's found in jewelry stores around the world. People still meditate with it, decorate their homes with giant geodes, collect specimens, give it as gifts, or simply admire it. because, well, it's beautiful. And whether you see it as a spiritual stone or a geological masterpiece or simply a really pretty purple crystal, it's impossible to deny that amethyst has earned one of the richest histories of any gemstone on Earth. Think about everything this one mineral has witnessed. That's an incredible journey for something that started as a few atoms of silicon, oxygen, and iron trapped inside a bubble of cooling lava. To see Greek myths, Egyptian pharaohs, Roman soldiers, medieval bishops, Tibetan monasteries, and modern laboratories. I think that's why I love this gemstone so much. You can hold a piece of amethyst in your hand, and depending on who you are or what you ask, you're holding a reminder to stay humble, a symbol of peace, a meditation tool, a geological miracle, or the physical evidence of one very guilty wine god trying to apologize. Same crystal, thousands of stories. And maybe that's the real magic. Not that the stone changes, but that every generation finds a new meaning inside it. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today on another episode of Uncut with Paige. If you enjoyed today's journey, I'd love for you to follow the show and share it with someone who loves history, science, or just really cool stories. Until next time, stay curious, keep looking a little closer, and join us next week. I'm sure next episode will be a gem.